Okay, with that, I will now have Abby come forward and read our first lesson this morning.
Hello. Our first reading comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 10 through 15. Listen now for the word of the Lord. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children there is nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. Thanks be to God for the reading of his word.
Okay, so thank you all for bearing with us this morning. You will see in your bulletins this morning's message titled From One Generation to the Next by the Reverend Dr. Greg Carmer. You will also see that I am not the Reverend Dr. Greg Carmer. So thankfully, Greg has done this in a way where he's laid it out pretty clearly and able to be presented by someone. That lucky someone will be me this morning. So keep in mind that 100% of what you are hearing is not from me. So do not take this face and whatever out of your mind and imagine it coming from Pastor Greg, because he will deserve, and I'm sure as he will pass on to God, the credit for the inspiration for this morning's message. So just please bear that in mind as we go through this morning. So we are in the midst of our stewardship focus, an annual time of paying particular attention to our practice of giving. And so the theme that was come up with this year by the deacons is following Jesus forward in faith. And the theme verse is from Psalm 145:4. It says, "Each generation will announce to the next your wonderful and powerful deeds." So as we talk about money, that can be an uncomfortable thing for a pastor. So in a way, maybe Greg's a little happy that he, as a pastor, doesn't have to deliver that message this morning in person. But he does start with a story, hearing about a farmer who called the office of the minister asking to see the head hog at the trough. The receptionist said, "Sir, if you're talking about our beloved minister, you may call him reverend or pastor, but I don't think it would be proper to refer to him as the head hog at the trough." "Well, all right," the farmer said. "I just sold a few sows and was going to donate $10,000 to the building fund, so I was hoping to catch him." "Oh, just a minute, sir," the receptionist said. "I think I heard the little porker just come in." Money can certainly change our attitude in various ways. This morning's passage, second teaching, is an extended episode about money from Luke chapter 12. And so if you'd like to follow along, certainly you could. It is a little bit longer, so if it helps you to follow along, it's from Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 34. I'll give you 5 or 10 seconds to maybe flip down on your phone or turn there in the Pew Bibles. Luke chapter 12. It's 655 in the blue Bible in your pew and 949 in the red Bible. Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 34. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. "The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, 'What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops.' Then he said, 'This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than birds? Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom first, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." This is the word of the Lord. In this entire passage, it's very complete. We see three things: an interaction, we see a parable, and we see a teaching. Legacy, inheritance, a lasting heritage is a concern in all three of those things. Our focus in stewardship this year is to leave a lasting legacy, to transform, by God's grace, material goods into something greater, a spiritual legacy and inheritance for those who come after us, not who come after us. Interesting about reading someone else's words. In the interaction portion of this passage, someone is concerned with getting an inheritance and wants Jesus to intervene. Jesus says, "I'm not a judge. These matters are not my concern, but I am concerned about something bigger. Not what possessions are in your life, but what the condition is within your heart." In verse 15 it says, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Jesus offers this warning because possessions and wealth are slippery things. They have a way of both slipping into our imagination and into our hearts. They also have a way of slipping out of our hands. This interaction speaks mostly of misplaced value and interest. The man in this interaction is more concerned with possessions than with the bigger matter of his heart. Second, here, Jesus tells a parable. In the parable, we meet someone who is interested in keeping all of his goods for himself. And it says, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, 'What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops.' So he builds bigger and bigger barns. But in the end, he dies. He does not enjoy the benefit of his hoarding, and it is not clear who does benefit from all of this that he has gathered with himself, or gathered wealth. He has a misguided strategy. Hoard wealth for your own enjoyment and safety. It's very misguided in its mindset. This proves to be a very foolish way to live. He stores up things for themselves, the reference, stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God, says the parable. And as we heard in Ecclesiastes 5, I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there is nothing left for them to inherit. This little parable of building bigger and bigger barns offers a negative example of what not to do. But next, Jesus offers the positive teaching. Here, I believe Jesus puts some meat on the bone of what it means to be rich towards God. We can think of it as life instructions on how to avoid being foolish. It is a reminder to focus on what matters most in life while we have time. We are invited to consider the birds of the air and the flowers of the field. They don't anxiously worry about the future, yet God still provides for them. This is an invitation to be free from worry. There is enough out there for you. Do you ever worry about whether there will be enough resources, enough money, enough time? Greg says he does sometimes, and I think we all do. Jesus' teaching here is not an excuse to be negligent or lazy or foolish. Is there anything wrong with being concerned with earning money, saving money, preparing for the future? Not at all. In fact, Scripture has a lot to say about the gift of material blessings, prosperity, and planning wisely. The richness and abundance of God's good creation and our God-given creativity and ability to work are good gifts. They should be received and enjoyed with gratitude. Prosperity, resources, a savings account, none of these are bad things. They are things that we can and should give thanks for. If you are not thinking wisely about providing for yourself and others, you will not find in the Bible justification for neglecting the responsibilities that you have and for being a poor steward with the opportunities and obligations that have been entrusted to you. Resources are good, but we ought not ask them to do what they cannot do. As Paul McCartney said, "I don't care too much for money. Money can't buy me love." Jesus' teaching is not negative, just saying, don't worry. Rather, it comes with a positive thing to seek. Seek first God's kingdom. Pursue a right relationship with God, the land, with each other, even ourselves. If that is your first concern, then you'll find that you have all you need. But what of his advice? Back to the scripture, verse 32. It says, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." He's given a quote from Fran Pratt, who writes, "Sell my possessions and give to the poor? Is that what it means to be rich toward God? You're telling me that life isn't found in having an abundance of possessions, but life is found in giving possessions away, and somehow that gets me invisible, indestructible treasure later? I see why the rich young ruler turned away a few chapters later. It's a hard paradigm to understand." Hard to understand indeed. Hard to practice even more so. Perhaps this is what some of us are called to do. But certainly it is the call for all of us to live in relation to material goods such that our hearts are neither anxious nor hoarding, but instead open to receive with gratitude and give generously in trust. And so that becomes our focus here next. Receiving with gratitude and giving generously has at least three positive outcomes. First is what generous giving does for us. It helps us to focus on what matters most. Life does not consist in the abundance of possession, but if you are focused on possessions or lack of them, then you are in danger of missing the point. And that is the definition of foolish living. Greg gives this illustration. In 1923, at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago, Illinois, 8 of the most powerful money magnates in the world gathered for a meeting. These 8, if they combined their resources and their assets, controlled more money than the U.S. Treasury. In that group were such men as Charles Schwab. He was the president of a steel company. Richard Whitney was the president of the New York Stock Exchange. And Arthur Cutten was a wheat speculator. Albert Fall was a presidential cabinet member, personally a very wealthy man. Jesse Livermore was the greatest bear on Wall Street in his generation. Leon Fraser was the president of the International Bank of Settlements. Ivan Kruger headed the largest monopoly. Quite an impressive group of people. Let's look at that same group later in life. Charles Schwab died penniless. Richard Whitney spent the rest of his life serving a sentence in Sing Sing prison. Arthur Cutton, that great wheat speculator, became insolvent. Albert Fall was pardoned from a federal prison so he might die at home. Leon Fraser, the president of that big international bank, he committed suicide. Jesse Livermore, he committed suicide. Ivan Kruger, he committed suicide. 7 of those 8 great big money magnates had lives that were disasters before they left planet Earth. So what mistakes did they make? Thinking that what they had and what they controlled belonged to them. In contrast, a different example. The very first billionaire was John D. Rockefeller, a man who knew how to set goals and follow through. He was a millionaire at the age of 23 and a billionaire by 50. Every decision, attitude, and relationship was tailored to create his personal power and wealth. But at the age of 53, he became ill. He was dying. The world's only billionaire, who could buy anything he wanted, couldn't sleep, wouldn't smile. Nothing in life meant anything to him. Doctors said he would die within a year. As he approached death, he realized that he couldn't take any of his success with him. The man who controlled the business world suddenly realized he wasn't in control of his own life. He had a choice, and he made it. He announced that he wanted to channel his assets to hospitals, research, and mission work, establishing the John D. Rockefeller Foundation. This eventually led to the discovery of penicillin, as well as cures for current strains of malaria, tuberculosis, and diphtheria. The list of discoveries resulting from his choice is enormous. But perhaps the most amazing part of Rockefeller's story is that the moment he began to truly give back, he began to get better. The man who almost died at 53 lived to be 98. He learned gratitude, and doing so made him whole. It's one thing to be healed, it's quite another to be made whole. As a side note, this is actually from me. It's interesting that Greg put this illustration in there. My father, late in his career, after retiring from his primary job, had the chance to actually work for the Rockefeller Foundation for a few years. And so they have offices in Africa and Asia. And so I was fortunate enough, our family got to see kind of firsthand, as my dad was dealing with in some operations with them, just how real this is and how amazing it has become over the years. So we're thankful, and we can see too sort of the real life story of how productive John D. Rockefeller and his foundation were in his realization of what's important and what's not. So back to Greg. Our gifts not need to be big. We don't have to be Rockefeller. In fact, we can use the smallness of our resources as an excuse to not do what we can. Remember the widow's 2 mites? It is not the size of the gift. No, not at all. It is the spirit in which it is given. And this is true regardless of how much we have or don't have. Remember, you don't have to have money to love money. Maya Angelou said, "I have found that among its other benefits, giving liberates the soul of the giver." Giving generously is part of how we become who we are called to be. And as we practice it, we learn to walk in freedom and trust. And so secondly, giving generously models for our kids and those that we might bring up what a proper relationship to money looks like. We need to model what it means to receive with gratitude and give with generosity. Greg's parents were such models for him and his siblings of what this can look like. I'm going to just read it as him because this is hard to do. This is Greg speaking. "We always had what we needed, and Mom and Dad made a habit of giving generously to others. Many of our friends had vacation homes and new cars, but Mom and Dad chose to prioritize supporting others and giving generously. When I was about 8 years old, they invited a missionary intern, Dina Turner, to live in our home for a year. This was a 3.5-bedroom house, and there were 5 of us kids. Missionaries from all over supported in the in-between. My grandfather pastored rural churches and had several families of farmers. I remember neighbors delivering bags of produce from their fields, or sometimes cuts of meat if a hog were butchered. I remember Grandma cleaning little bluegills we had caught and to and taking them to Grandma Curtis down the road. They modeled what it was to receive with gratitude and share with generosity. How do we pass that knowledge and practice on to our kids? We practice it. We let them be a part of family decisions about giving. We let them know the joy of sacrificial giving and the joy of blessing others. Corrie ten Boom said, "I have held many things in my hands, and I have lost them all. But whatever I have placed in God's hands, I still possess." So teaching kids and those that we are entrusted to give is a great positive outcome of receiving with gratitude and giving generously. Finally, we need to recognize what giving can make possible in and as a church. Generously giving makes so many things possible within the setting and the context of the local church. The journey of faith, we know, is not a solo quest. Rather, it is about community. We need community to hold our countercultural values together. The teachings of Jesus are so countercultural that we need help. We help each other to live into them together. Churches don't do everything. They cannot. And so, we don't try. But church does help provide a faithful community of what it looks like to live a life following Jesus. Our practices as a community point us all in the right direction to answers of life's biggest questions. Like, what is life all about? Who is God? What should I do with my life? What matters most? And of what does a good life consist? Where is true joy found? What does love look like? What do I do with my disappointments? What do I do with the wrongs that I've suffered? What do I do with the wrongs I've committed? How do I find forgiveness? And how do I forgive others? How do I live so as to avoid missing the point of it all? What we do here is not simply to provide cognitive answers to those things, passing on Bible stories and basic doctrine. They are important, but more important is to raise the next generation in a community of people who seek to practice that, who know what matters most in life and how to receive the abundant life that is offered to us in Jesus. The budget for our church is available for anyone to be able to access if you would like. It details how money is spent on things like salaries, utilities, supplies, building upkeep, etc. It will take a close look. We'll take a close look at that actually next month in anticipation of our annual meeting. So if you take a look in the brochure, there's brochures for the stewardship campaign that have been sent out. You can see what that spending goes towards, what those expenses serve. Things like worship, Christian education, pastoral care, fellowship, missions and outreach. And he says that category of missions and outreach is at just over 10%, but as a congregation, there is no reason that it can't grow to 15, 20, even 25% of our operating budget. He says that is my hope. And so also about the letter and estimate of giving card that have been sent out. So in 2 weeks, April 30th, during the service, we'll take a moment to return the estimate of giving cards. If you haven't already received, sorry, forgive me, I don't know the timing, so you might have already received them or you might get them this week. When you receive them, if you've not already, that'll be the timeline. April 30th, you'll have to bring those back in. Why do we do this? So it helps us with planning and being wise stewards, and it also helps you be thoughtful about a giving practice, sort of as a spiritual discipline. Being intentional about receiving with gratitude. This is the summary, by the way. Sorry, this is where some of the nuances wear out a little bit in the reading. Being intentional about receiving with gratitude and giving with generosity is important for these reasons: who we become and who we love, what we model for the next generation, and what it makes possible here in our church. So Greg and I and the deacons and the leadership of the church ask you to consider that prayerfully as you respond to this message and to our stewardship campaign. And now let's all join and stand together in singing our closing hymn, number 466, Take My Life and Let It Be.